Did you know that you're missing 93% of the messages being communicated to you because they're being communicated through body language? You're missing it. It's getting right past you. And in this video, we're going to teach you how to understand it, interpret it, and catch every bit of meaning from the body language that you're seeing. Okay, so when we talk about body language, you can instinctively look at someone, and for some reason, each person has a pretty good idea of what's being communicated by somebody's body language. Whether they've had training or not, whether they realize they're doing it or not, they take a look at someone's body language and they start to formulate some opinions about how that person feels and what they're thinking. Often it's subconscious, where you think to yourself, oh, I don't think they're having a good day, but you can't really articulate why that is. So when we look at this picture of this lady on the phone, what's being communicated by her body language? When I do this in live training classes, a lot of times I get responses such as she's frustrated, she's tired, she doesn't want to be talking on the phone, or she doesn't like what's being discussed. Now I would ask, okay, well, what if she just has a crick in her neck? What if she just slept on her neck wrong and she doesn't feel good? It could be any number of different things. The main point that I want to communicate to you guys is the fact that body language interpretation doesn't happen in a vacuum. There aren't hard and fast specific rules. This body language means this one thing. It's always going to be dependent upon the circumstances surrounding the body language that you look at. What you observe will be added up with what you have observed prior to it, and you'll add it with what you observe next. Putting those things together will give you a mental picture of what they're really communicating with their body language. There are some misconceptions that people try to communicate as hard and fast rules about certain types of body language. The main one being crossed arms. If you cross your arms, that's a closed body posture, and that supposedly communicates that you're being deceptive, or you have something to hide, or you're uncomfortable. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that. Eye movements. There's rules going around that people say that if you look up and to the right, then you're formulating a lie because you're looking at your creative center of your brain. If you look up and to the left, you're accessing your memory, and so you're telling the truth. Well, that's not always necessarily the truth either. In my training and experience, people's eye movements are going to be dependent upon several different factors. What if you ask someone to describe a room that they have been in before? Will they not look in the direction, well, there's this over here, and then the bed is over there, there's a window over on the left? Well, if they're looking left and they're looking right and they're doing all those things, then eye movements obviously are going to be situational when you're interpreting them as far as their meaning with body language. Palm position. People say that palms down is aggressive and palms up is submissive. But is that always going to be the truth? And of course, there's the ever popular hands on the hips. That means that mom's angry. She's had enough. You've crossed the line. Well, it doesn't always mean that either. So crossed arms. Supposedly, having your arms crossed is a closed body position. Closed body posture indicates deception, right? Well, not always. If we look at this picture of this young man, does he seem like he's being deceptive? Or does he just seem like he's done a job well done and he's proud of himself? Does it always mean just one thing? What if it's somebody who's cold all the time? All of us know somebody who's always cold and always shivering, even in the middle of July, no matter what. Well, that person almost always has their arms crossed. Does that mean they've got something to hide? No, it just means they would like to have a blanket. Do you have a jacket I can borrow? So closed body posture in general and crossed arms in specific are going to be things that each situation will tell you what that body language probably means. It doesn't always mean deception. What about eye movements? Up and to the right we talked about, up and to the left. But that's not always going to mean that. We've been told our whole lives that looking to the left-brained people are creative, whereas right-brained people are analytical. So then why is it that looking to the right means that you're lying because you're being creative, but looking to the left means that you're accessing your memory? It doesn't make any sense. These things don't add up. We're going to talk about how you can tell what eye movements do mean based on the situation that you are in. Eye movements, as we talked about earlier, for directional descriptions are just one example of a time in which eye movements are not going to be able to be interpreted one specific way. Because if a person is remembering something, or what if they're doing something quite as simple as an old saying, what goes up must come down. Well, I looked up, am I lying about it? No. Palm position, we talked about, palms down is aggressive. There's no shortage of pictures of politicians with their hand doing this bladed palm down gesture. Apparently they all went to the exact same school of body language and assertiveness. Put on a red tie, point like this, and that means you're powerful and in control of the situation. That doesn't always communicate that fact, though. It certainly doesn't communicate that fact for every situation. And palms up is supposed to be submissive, requesting, please sir, can I have some more? But that's not always the case either. So for example, this picture. What does this picture of a palm facing straight to us mean? Everyone should interpret that as meaning stop. But here we are with a palm down position, and it clearly means stop. It doesn't mean assertive. It doesn't mean command presence. It doesn't mean taking control of a situation. It only means, hey, stop. Now what about these hands? If that hand meant stop, why is it that these hands mean something else? The palm position is exactly the same. Shouldn't it mean the same thing? No. We've cropped the picture so that we know that there's no other context clues other than the palms in the photograph. But what does it mean? We all know it means I have a question. Pick me, pick me. So if this means stop, and this means pick me, but it's all the same palm position, can we agree that the situation will give you the clues that you need to tell you what the body language likely means? Now, what about this palm position? It's very similar palm position to stop, but this doesn't mean stop. This means I give up. And we all know it means I give up. So as soon as we see that particular palm position, along with the rest of the situation, we know that it means, oh, okay, I give up. Now, what about the palms up? It's supposed to be submissive or requesting. But what about this photograph of an individual whose palms are up? He's very clearly not submitting. He looks more like demanding. He's demanding an answer to his question, demanding an explanation for behavior he's seeing, demanding an explanation for behavior that he's seeing, demanding an explanation for a scenario that he's stuck in. That is not submissive behavior at all, and it's certainly not submissive body language. Very, very similar body language now. This same individual, it looks like he's just had enough with the situation, but still palms up in the supposedly submissive palm position. Now, what about the hands on the hips? So supposedly hands on the hips indicates frustration. Hands on the hips indicates that agitation. Mom's had enough. You have crossed the line. That's usually the interpretation that I get when I say, what does hands on the hips mean? Well, that's not always the case either. If hands are on the hips and the hands are open against the hips with the fingers pointed forward, what people usually refer to as the Superman stance, that actually communicates a lot of confidence and command presence. But it's almost identical to the hands on the hips that means mom's had enough. So we have to be cognizant of the situation and interpret what the body language means in the context of the situation that we're in. The very same hands on the hips gesture could simply mean I'm exhausted, I'm tired, I need to catch my breath, I'm sweating. Meanwhile, if you take that similar hands on the hips position and you simply point the fingers backwards, like in this photograph, what you get is a more curious, inquisitive, or submissive version of the very same hands on the hips posture. So what is the truth about body language interpretation? The truth is we know that we can't simply make some rules and make a list of them and say hands on the hips means this, looking over here means that, crossed arms means this. We know that. Now, I always make reference to the movie The Prestige. Hugh Jackman movie where he plays a magician. Magicians do magic tricks, and it's described as a three-step process. First, there's the promise, and then the turn, and then the prestige. Very similarly, when we are interpreting body language, we start with the baseline, and then there's the pivot, and then observation. The baseline step is where you speak to someone conversationally about topics that have no or little downstream consequences for them. Then you make a pivot. And when you make that pivot into different topics, often topics that have greater or even very significant downstream consequences, then you observe that body language and you determine what their new body language says about their feelings towards the new topic. That is the most powerful way that we can interpret body language in another person, given any scenario. Baseline, you talk to them about topics that do not have the ability to hurt them. You talk to them about topics that do not have the ability to cause downstream consequences that will bring them pain, embarrassment, or shame. You talk to them and watch their hand and arm position in that baseline mode, that normal conversational mode. Watch their hands, watch their arms, keep note of their eye movements in those normal situations, and the part that most people miss, take a look at their feet. Where's their feet pointing? When people are engaged in a conversation with you or engaged in a task that they are doing, their feet are almost always pointed at that task. Some people call it squaring up. You're squared up to the conversation, you're squared up to the task, you're squared up to what is being done right now. You're engaged in that. If the foot position changes, you start to get an idea for where that person really would like to be or where that person really would like to go. So baseline them. Now, keep in mind your downstream consequences. You have significant downstream consequences and you have insignificant downstream consequences. Just like when you're having a conversation with somebody talking about just about anything, favorite colors, favorite foods, what are your kids' names, things of that nature. You speak to them about things that have insignificant downstream consequences. Doesn't matter if you like lasagna and I like pizza. It's not the end of the world for anybody. But then there are topics that have significant downstream consequences, whether they're positive downstream consequences or negative downstream consequences. Whether you have the potential to make a great deal of money or you have the potential to end up in prison, a conversation about significant downstream consequences will cause a level of tension in a person's body to rise in them, and it will cause their body to start to do things that they don't necessarily have conscious control or awareness of. That change is where you watch them and begin to interpret their body language meaning. So you go from insignificant downstream consequences in conversation, you pivot, and you go to significant downstream consequences in conversation. Then you observe changes in their hand and arm position. If the person has had a crossed arms, closed body posture during insignificant downstream consequences, but then they change and they end up opening up their body posture and beginning to do grooming gestures, flattening out their clothing where it doesn't need it, picking non-existent lint off of themselves. They start doing self-soothing, like rubbing the back of their neck or touching their nose or touching their ears. All of those things are now changes that are significant. So you see that the interpretation of crossed arms means deception, it's too simple because some people naturally cross their arms when they're having conversation. But if you pivot to that significant downstream consequence form of conversation and those body changes start to occur, even if they open up, now you see a change in their body posture and you can determine what that change probably means. Changes in eye movements are the same way. Some people always have great eye contact when they're in conversation, but if you pivot to significant downstream consequences, now the eye contact changes. But a little known fact that is a fact is that when people are lying to you, often they will take and make sure they have better eye contact with you. They will maintain eye contact for longer because number one, they want to see if you believe them, and number two, they're trying to make sure you believe them. So if a person has had kind of flighty eye contact throughout the conversation, watching the cars go by, people watching as you're speaking, and then when you make the pivot, now all of a sudden they're wide-eyed and staring deep into your soul, it means something about what they're saying. And you have the opportunity to interpret it because you're taking note of the change in their eye contact. So up and to the right doesn't always mean lying, up and to the left doesn't always mean accessing memory, and great eye contact doesn't always mean telling the truth. You have to compare what they're doing now with what they were doing before the pivot. The same thing goes with changes in foot position. Like I said, instinctively, we all have the ability to kind of interpret what's going on with people's body language, even though we can't always articulate it. One thing that you'll see a lot, and now that I've mentioned it, you're going to notice it, is when someone's having a conversation with you and they're engaged in the conversation. But we've all had the experience of we're trying to kind of talk a conversation into a soft landing and get on with our day. And so we start taking little metered steps to the direction we want to go. Okay, that's what was going on, but our feet are pointed that way. We're still speaking. Oh, okay, so I understand what's going on. Okay, and then what happened? But we're still pointing our feet to the escape route. Same thing even if someone's sitting down at a desk. If you're having a conversation with somebody while they're at their office and they're engaged in the conversation, they back away from their desk, they turn their chair towards you, they're talking to you. But a body language indicator that they've decided the conversation is either over or no longer interesting to them is when, while they continue looking at you and talking to you, they turn right back to their desk and they start typing again. And now you're part-time eye contact as they're typing, looking at the computer, facing their computer, but maybe looking at you. So that change in foot position is extremely important. The foot pointing is one thing that people minimize as far as its importance. It's profoundly important because it tells you where they truly would rather be. Is it here with you engaged in conversation, or is it an escape route? So make sure we're paying attention to foot position, because it's the one thing that people often forget to take a glance down and just see what the feet are doing, where they're pointing. The totality of the circumstances between the hand and arm position, the eye movements, and where the feet are pointing while the person is speaking to you is important to evaluate before the pivot and then after the pivot. When you take that totality of the circumstances, this is how they behaved before, this is how they're behaving now, you will have a strong position from which you can interpret body language and be able to articulate why you make the conclusions that you make.